JoeBolt.com, the teen social network time forgot. In the digital graveyard of failed social networks, most people remember Friendster, MySpace, and Google+. But there's one platform that predated them all, survived longer than most, and somehow managed to become completely irrelevant, despite having over 2 decades to figure it out. Meet Bolt.com, the social network that wanted to be everything to everyone under 18 and ended up being nothing to nobody. Founded in 1996 by Dan Pelson, who was himself only 22 years old, Bolt positioned itself as the first major online community specifically designed for teenagers. This wasn't just another website with a forum. This was supposed to be a digital revolution that would give teens their own corner of the internet. Pelson, a Harvard dropout who had previously worked at the Boston Globe, believed that teenagers were an underserved market online, and he was right. The problem was that being right about a market opportunity and successfully executing on it are 2 entirely different things. Bolt launched with the ambitious goal of creating a comprehensive online destination where teens could chat, share content, play games, and express themselves freely. The timing seemed perfect, the internet was exploding, and teenagers were just beginning to discover the power of online communities. What could possibly go wrong? The answer to that question would unfold over the next 21 years in spectacular fashion. In those early days of 1996, when most people were still figuring out what the internet even was, Bolt was actually ahead of its time. The site featured chat rooms, message boards, personal profiles, and even early forms of content sharing that wouldn't become mainstream for another decade. Pelson managed to secure initial funding and quickly attracted attention from major media companies who were desperate to understand this thing called the World Wide Web. By 1999, Bolt had grown to over 1 million registered users, making it one of the largest teen-focused websites on the internet. The site was generating buzz in tech circles, with many industry observers predicting it would become the MTV of the internet generation. Revenue was flowing in from advertising partnerships with major brands eager to reach the coveted teenage demographic. Bolt's success caught the eye of Lycos, one of the major search engines of the era, which acquired the company in 2001 for a reported $25 million. At the time, this seemed like validation that Bolt had found the secret formula for capturing teenage attention online. The acquisition was supposed to provide Bolt with the resources and infrastructure needed to compete with emerging social platforms, but instead, it marked the beginning of a long, slow decline into irrelevance. Under Lycos ownership, Bolt's problems began to multiply faster than teenagers abandoning their profiles. The first major issue was a complete misunderstanding of what made the platform special in the first place. Lycos executives, most of whom had never spent significant time trying to understand teenage behavior online, began making changes that fundamentally altered Bolt's appeal. They introduced heavy-handed moderation policies that stifled the free expression that had originally attracted users to the platform. Chat rooms that had once been vibrant with teenage conversation became sterile and over-monitored. The organic community that had developed around shared interests and authentic teenage experiences was gradually replaced by corporate-sponsored content and advertising-driven features. Meanwhile, the technology behind Bolt was aging rapidly. While competitors were investing heavily in user interface improvements and new features, Bolt's technical infrastructure remained largely unchanged from its late 1990s origins. Page load times were slow, the design looked increasingly dated, and new features were rolled out at a glacial pace. By 2003, just 2 years after the Lycos acquisition, user engagement had dropped significantly, and many of Bolt's most active community members had begun migrating to newer platforms that better understood their needs. The rise of MySpace in 2003 and Facebook in 2004 should have been a wake-up call for Bolt's management, but instead of learning from these competitors, they seemed determined to ignore them entirely. MySpace had cracked the code on letting users customize their profiles with music, graphics, and personal expression tools that made each page feel unique. Facebook, initially limited to college students, was building a clean, fast platform that prioritized real connections between people who actually knew each other. Bolt, meanwhile, was stuck in a time warp, still operating like a traditional website with forums and chat rooms rather than evolving into a true social networking platform. The site's user interface looked like it had been designed in 1998 because, in many ways, it had been. While MySpace users were embedding music players and customizing their pages with HTML code, Bolt users were still limited to basic text profiles and static photo uploads. The gap between what Bolt offered and what teenagers actually wanted was growing wider by the day. Perhaps most damaging of all, Bolt's management seemed to fundamentally misunderstand how social dynamics had changed online. The platform was still built around the idea of anonymous chat rooms and forum discussions, while the rest of the internet was moving toward identity-based networking where real names and authentic relationships were becoming the norm. By 2006, Bolt's user base had shrunk dramatically, but rather than doubling down on innovation, the company made a series of increasingly desperate pivots that only accelerated their decline. They attempted to rebrand themselves as an entertainment portal, focusing on celebrity gossip, music reviews, and pop culture content rather than community building. This strategy completely alienated their remaining core users, who had stayed with the platform because of its community features, while failing to attract new users who had dozens of better options for entertainment content. The site became a confusing hybrid that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a social network, an entertainment magazine, or a gaming portal. During this period, Bolt also made the catastrophic decision to implement a points-based system that was supposed to gamify user engagement, but instead created a complicated maze of virtual currencies and rewards that confused more than it motivated. Users could earn points for various activities, but the system was so convoluted that most people gave up trying to understand it. Meanwhile, the actual social features that had originally made Bolt popular were being neglected and removed. Chat rooms were shut down due to moderation concerns, message boards became ghost towns, and the profile system remained frustratingly limited compared to what was available on other platforms. The years between 2007 and 2010 represented Bolt's lost period, where the platform seemed to exist in a state of digital purgatory. Traffic continued to decline, but the site remained online, sustained by advertising revenue that was diminishing, but not yet completely gone. During this time, Bolt made several attempts to reinvent itself, including a brief and unsuccessful foray into mobile applications that were universally panned for being slow, buggy, and years behind the competition. The iPhone had launched in 2007, and by 2008 it was clear that mobile would be the future of social networking, but Bolt's mobile offerings were embarrassingly primitive. Their apps crashed frequently, had limited functionality, and looked like they had been designed by people who had never actually used a smartphone. Meanwhile, platforms like Facebook were investing billions in mobile development and creating seamless experiences across all devices. Twitter had emerged as the platform for real-time communication. Instagram was revolutionizing photo sharing, and even newer platforms like Snapchat were beginning to capture teenage attention with innovative features like disappearing messages. Bolt, by contrast, was still struggling to make their desktop website load quickly. The company had fallen so far behind the curve that catching up would have required a complete rebuild from the ground up, something they clearly lacked the resources and vision to accomplish. Throughout the 2010s, Bolt continued to exist in an increasingly bizarre state of irrelevance. The site maintained a small but dedicated user base, primarily consisting of people who had been using the platform for years and either didn't know how to migrate elsewhere or had developed emotional attachments to the community they had built there. These users, many of whom had grown from teenagers into adults during their time on Bolt, kept the platform alive through their continued engagement, but their numbers were steadily dwindling. New user acquisition had essentially stopped completely by 2012, meaning that Bolt was slowly dying as its existing users gradually lost interest or moved on with their lives. The site's content during this period became increasingly repetitive and stale, with the same small group of users posting to nearly empty forums and chat rooms that had once hosted thousands of simultaneous conversations. Bolt made periodic attempts to revitalize the platform, including partnerships with various content providers and celebrity endorsement deals, but these efforts felt hollow and desperate. The fundamental problem was that the internet had moved on, and Bolt was still trying to solve problems that no longer existed while ignoring the actual challenges of building online communities in the social media age. Perhaps the most telling indicator of Bolt's irrelevance during its final years was how rarely it appeared in discussions about social media history or digital culture. While platforms like Friendster and MySpace are remembered as important stepping stones in the evolution of social networking, Bolt has been almost completely forgotten by internet historians and cultural commentators. This wasn't an oversight, it was a reflection of the platform's failure to make any lasting impact on how people communicate online. Unlike MySpace, which influenced web design and music discovery for years, or Friendster, which established many of the basic conventions of social networking, Bolt never developed a distinctive identity or unique value proposition that people remember. The site's longest-lasting contribution to internet culture might be serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of continuous innovation and user-focused development. Even its failure wasn't spectacular enough to be memorable. It was just a slow fade into irrelevance that left observers feeling more pity than fascination. When Bolt finally shut down in 2017, the announcement barely registered in tech media, and most of the coverage focused on the fact that anyone was surprised it had lasted that long. The end came quietly on July 31, 2017, when Bolt.com's servers went dark for the final time. There was no dramatic announcement, no farewell tour, no attempt to preserve the archives of 2 decades worth of teenage conversations and community building. The site simply stopped working, leaving behind only cached pages in the Internet Archive as evidence that it had ever existed. The final years had seen virtually no investment in the platform, with the site running on what appeared to be a skeleton crew and minimal technical maintenance. By the time it closed, Bolt's daily user count had dropped to the hundreds, a far cry from the millions who had once made it their digital home. The shutdown was handled by Lycos, which had itself been acquired multiple times and was operating as a shadow of its former self. There were no attempts to sell the platform or transfer user data to another service. The 21-year experiment simply ended. Some longtime users organized informal groups on other platforms to stay in touch, but without the shared space that had brought them together, these communities quickly dispersed. The digital relationships and memories that had been built on Bolt over more than 2 decades vanished overnight, a sobering reminder of the ephemeral nature of online communities. Looking back at Bolt's 21-year journey from innovation to irrelevance, several key lessons emerge about what it takes to build lasting digital communities. The platform's early success demonstrates that there was indeed a market opportunity for teen-focused online communities, but their failure to maintain that position shows how quickly advantages can disappear in the fast-moving world of technology. Bolt's biggest mistake was treating their early lead as a permanent advantage rather than a temporary head start that required constant innovation to maintain. While competitors were reimagining what online communities could be, Bolt remained trapped in their original vision of chat rooms and message boards. They failed to understand that social networking wasn't just about providing tools for communication, it was about creating experiences that reflected how people actually wanted to connect with each other. The platform's corporate ownership also highlighted the challenges of maintaining authentic community spaces within larger media companies that prioritize advertising revenue over user experience. Perhaps most importantly, Bolt's story illustrates the importance of listening to users and adapting to their changing needs rather than trying to force them into predetermined behaviors. The teenagers who made Bolt successful in 1996 had evolved into sophisticated internet users by 2006, but the platform never evolved with them. In the end, Bolt.com stands as a monument to missed opportunities and a reminder that in the digital world, being first means nothing if you're not also willing to continuously reinvent yourself.